Good morning and peace be upon you this beautiful day, wherever you're tuning in from. My name is Qasim Rashid, and this is the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. If you're listening on Substack, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We hit a major milestone with our 500th publication on Substack last week. We are now being read by 2.5 million people a month. We have well over 100,000 downloads on this podcast. You guys are crushing it, and I appreciate you immensely. We've got a fantastic show lined up, a heartfelt show about courage. Got two amazing young people, Ryan Powers and Moataz Salim, who are going to discuss just the courageous acts they've taken. And we need these stories in these difficult times. Ryan is a Harvard law trained attorney, let go from his job for speaking up against the Trump regime. Moataz Salim is a doctoral student studying clinical psychology, removed from his program from George Washington for speaking out against the genocide in Palestine. Heartbreaking stories, but powerful stories of courage. And I'm going to ask at the end of each of those interviews for you to support each of them meaningfully because we need to support the folks doing the tough work. It's not enough to simply say you stand with them. We need to invest in them as best as we possibly can. Short intro. We're going to go to break right now. And when we come back, we'll be speaking to Ryan Powers. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM, channel 126. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View, channel 126, the most awesome show on the multiverse on the Qasim Rashid podcast. This week, we've got a pretty exciting show and depressing show. So just fair warning. I'm joined by my first guest, Ryan Powers. He's a Philly native, a Harvard law grad, licensed in New York and DC. And Ryan came across my attention not too long ago, but his story is one that has inspired me, and it's one that I need everyone to know about. If you've been paying attention, you may have noticed we have a fascist in the White House. And one of the hallmarks of fascism is to get those who are in power to capitulate to his every demand. And one thing he's done is force major law firms to capitulate, to fold to him. You've probably seen law firms have contributed or committed $100 million in pro bono legal services towards him and kind of to be his personal legal army. Some lawyers are resisting. One of them is Ryan Powers, and his story is one that I think needs to be told, especially at a time when you have major universities, major corporations, major law firms capitulating to this fascist. It's that much more critical that we elevate the voices of those who are speaking up to immense personal cost as well. Ryan is one of those people who is leading by example, and he joins us. Ryan, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
I wish we were meeting under better circumstances, but unfortunately, this is the world that we live in. And so, before we get too much further, I'd love for you to just share with our listeners a little bit about you, why you went to law school, what it was like at Harvard in this climate, and how we got to this point where you're trying to fight back against this Trump regime.
Absolutely. So I'm from Philadelphia originally. I have known for a very long time that I wanted to go to law school because I am also a high school dropout. So it was very important for me to look at the systems that created that and the circumstances that I thought could be fixed or maybe changed to improve the lives of people who were in similar situations to me. So I ended up going to law school. I was motivated to not only get really great professional training, but also do the right thing, earn some savings, be able to have a career that I was really proud of. So I ended up enrolling at Harvard. At Harvard, I was fortunate that I was only there really during the time that our former president was in office. And so we weren't really affected as much by the current presidential regime. But I think definitely when you were at Harvard, you had a sense that things you did mattered and carried some consequence based on the way that people perceived Harvard in the world. So I took that responsibility really seriously. And it really led me to make many decisions, both in law school and up to our present conversation, that I like to think reflect those values.
You write that this op-ed that you wrote that I recommend everyone read leads with this sentence. Big law, it turns out, doesn't just train lawyers, it also trains silence. What do you mean by that?
I mean that Big Law as an institution comprises more than 120,000 lawyers. It also generates billions of dollars in revenue every year. And because of that, there's a prioritization of the status quo. So people are very afraid to create waves. They're very afraid to create any sort of discontent out of fear that perhaps there could be retaliation or some sort of public reckoning. And I think where that's a problem in our current regime is when the law itself is under attack through a president who's stripping security clearances, issuing executive orders targeting law firms, and targeting independent bar associations. That means something. So when there's a culture of silence and suppression going on because people cannot speak freely about these issues, there are real consequences.
Shakespeare famously wrote that we're going to create chaos, and the first thing we'll do is we'll kill all the lawyers. And people often misattribute that to mean that he was anti-lawyer. And the statement actually is the opposite. He's actually very pro-lawyer because he's pointing out that it is lawyers who are kind of the last line of defense for the ordinary person. People think it's judges, but you still need a lawyer to go before the judge to argue the case, to protect those rights. And we're seeing this capitulation. And, part of the frustration for me is how this is not just an issue of the right, it's an issue of the left. Doug Emhoff gave a resounding lecture about the importance of lawyers and standing up against this regime. And the very next day, his firm signed an MOU with the Trump regime to represent them and give them pro bono legal hours while he's a partner at the firm. And I think it's important that we call that out, not because I'm anti-Doug. I've met him, I think he's a nice guy. But at the same time, if you're going to talk the talk, you better be willing to walk the walk because you come from a place of privilege and power, and these injustices that we're seeing aren't going to affect you the same way that they affect everyone else. You've written this op-ed, it's gone viral, and one of the things that you'll never be able to get back is this experience of trying to protect your legal career. This is going to follow you, and I don't say that as a knock. I say that actually as a commendation that history will record that when push came to shove, you refused to back down from your principles. And I think, it's difficult now in the long term. It's going to pay off. I know it will. History, the moral arc of the universe always bends towards justice. But talk, Ryan, a little bit about what kind of impact this is having on you financially, on your mental health, on your future prospects.
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's not something that people have really asked about yet. I think that it was a hard decision to make. Ultimately, I knew that the stakes were very high. This is my career that we're talking about. It wasn't just getting fired, because I could have very quietly gone on to my next opportunity without creating any sort of conversation. But I really wanted to. And so when I decided that it was something that people should hear, should discuss, particularly this idea that policies at some of these big law firms are written very ambiguously, very deliberately. And I think because of that, there are consequences for lawyers they should be aware of, and there are consequences that spill out into the broader public. And so it's been challenging. The fallout has been really me losing my job, uh, losing my salary, my health insurance. I still have a place to live, which is great. And I've gotten a lot of really effusive support over the past few days and some thoughtful criticism as well, which I think only moves the narrative forward. But it's not been something that's easy, and it's not been something that I did without thinking. There was a lot of sacrifice involved, but I'm happy I did it, and I feel very confident in my decision.
And you should, because at the end of the day, we often talk about moments in history of what would I have done in this moment in history. And if I was there, I would have stood with the good guys, or I would have marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, or I would have stood with Rosa Parks, or I would have stood with Robert Smalls and Fred Hampton and all these icons of history. We forget that we're making history every day, and every day we have the opportunity to make a choice on how we want to proceed. You wrote a follow-up op-ed, Ryan, about what you would have done differently, or what you wish you would have done differently. And I want to walk through that because I think this is also indicative of your character and your integrity. The first thing you said you wish you had done differently is that you wish you had done this sooner. Talk about why, and talk about the process of what made you finally pull the trigger to say, I need to speak out now.
Right. So I wish I had done it sooner because everything went down about 6 weeks ago now, and it took me a good amount of time to write the piece, to edit it. I was initially shopping it to different publications and having conversations about that. Um, but it needed to come out. And I think every day that you wait is another day that this keeps going on without any sort of conversation. So yeah, I wish I had done it sooner.
One of the things that folks often forget is, um, and this is kind of your second point of how lonely the process is. And what folks often forget is that it doesn't have to be lonely because I think we all agree we don't want the suppression of speech, of legitimate differences of opinions. You're not advocating violence. You're not advocating anarchy or chaos. You're expressing a different perspective where we should uphold the rule of law. We should uphold a sense of justice. And oftentimes it's lonely because only a few folks are willing to speak up. So, what's your message, Ryan, to those who see the problem, who see what's happening, but are afraid to speak up for obvious reasons, retaliation, loss of income, loss of their living status? What is the message to them to make them feel more confident and comfortable in speaking up?
The message is that you're going to be okay. Because when I had gone through this process, a real guiding light for me was Rachel Cohen, who was the attorney who was fired. Well, she quit from her big law firm after anticipating that they would crack a deal with the president in a way that she felt she could not morally support as an employee. And
Yeah.
watching Rachel's journey and the ways in which she navigated the system, I thought, okay, life will not end if things in my big law firm don't work out don't work out, excuse me. And fundamentally, I felt very confident about talking to people about this and getting the message out there and creating conversation.
You make a point as well that your critique of in terms of things that you had wish you had done differently, that you wish you had been more specific, and you really provide a thoughtful nuance here, Ryan. And I'm going to quote you here. You say, and more importantly, my piece is a critique of firm leadership exclusively. I had hoped this was clear, but many of my friends work in big law. I have immense respect and admiration for the current big law attorneys and alumni quietly working within these systems to enact change. I commend them. At my former firm, I harbor nothing but utmost admiration for the vast majority of people who work there. So let's talk about that because some would argue and some do argue that it's not just the leadership that needs critique, it's the entire industry that needs critique. And if you're participating in it, you're complicit with it. I'm not saying I agree or disagree with that argument, but it is an argument put forth that we can't just be critical of the leadership because the leadership wouldn't have anyone to lead if the rest of the organization would stand up and say, no, we're not going to tolerate this. Why is your critique exclusively of firm leadership and not the broader big law industry?
This is why I think it's a great question. And this is why I think having nuanced conversations about people who may feel differently is really important.
Yeah.
I think that at the end of the day, there are a lot of people who do these jobs because they realize it could help them with their career, or in some ways could be a financial lifeline for someone to support their family, to pay off student loans, and to help them live. And I can't fault someone for making individual choices like that. I can understand that there are other jobs, there are other professional pathways that one could take as a lawyer, particularly if you're coming from elite education, like a law degree. But I do think that there are reasons, as I write about in my op-ed, that people choose to go into big law, and it's hard to fault them for that.
I think it's a fair point. Look, at the end of the day, everyone is at their own particular journey. Everyone has obligations, and I would rather use honey than vinegar to draw people out and say, "Hey, we can find ways to work together." Not everyone is going to have the courage that you're showing, Ryan, but everyone can do something. And as long as we're moving the ball forward, I think that's the important point about this. We certainly aren't going to, the old adage is that the beatings will continue until morale improves. Like that doesn't work and we need to find better ways to have these conversations. And finally, you point out something that I thought was very beautifully said, that I wish I had been angrier. James Baldwin reminds us that, regarding racial injustice, he says that to be black and to be consciously aware is to be in a state of anger or rage all the time. And that's the vibe I got from what you said here. But talk a bit more about that. Why do you wish you were angrier? What do you wish you were more angry about? What does that look like?
I think the legal profession really prioritizes people who are quiet and composed and articulate everything with utmost precision and calmness and clarity. And I think there are a lot of strengths there. I think that makes a lot of sense. But I also think it's something that we should think about when our institutions themselves are under attack. I think it's really important to meet the moment the way that it needs to be met. And I'm not advocating for any sort of violence. I'm not advocating for an overthrow of these institutions, but I am arguing for really strong, really bold change. And I think that means speaking out. I think that means questioning policies, thinking about why we follow things that we follow. And it's something that we need to really, really do with utmost vigor and the most passion right now to meet the moment. Because if we don't, the forces that are much stronger than us will capitalize off of our silence and they will use that as justification. And we cannot have that.
And we see it is really beautifully said, Ryan. And I think we see uh, that anger manifest in different industries in different ways. In the healthcare industry, we see the anger of Luigi Mangione, certainly not defending what he did, and certainly not endorsing it at all. I will say that we need to be honest about violence. Um, it is violence to kill a CEO in broad daylight, and it is violence for a CEO to enact policy that he knows will kill tens of thousands of people. The fact that our society or our legal system condemns only one kind of violence and not the other kind is, I think, fundamentally a problem. If it is wrong to kill a CEO in broad daylight, and I agree it is absolutely wrong, it is also wrong to pass policies that you know denying that child insulin is going to kill that child, denying that person AIDS medication is going to kill that person, and to do it knowingly. As a statistic, suddenly, well, I'm increasing shareholder value. Well, that's fundamentally a problem, and it elicits a violent response as well. And as we know, violence begets violence. In the legal profession, I think we're seeing some of the same things. Right now, we're seeing the power of the attorney general, the power of the president to flat out hide something like the Epstein files and pretend that they simply don't exist. He ran on this platform. Ghislaine Maxwell was sentenced to 20 years in prison for trafficking young children, young girls in particular. But suddenly, it no longer exists. And that to me is a violation of basic legal ethics. Pam Bondi fired her ethics lawyer for God's sake. That's not something you do when you're maintaining ethical compliance. That's something you do when you're about to break the law severely. And I think the point is that if you or I were to do something like that as ordinary attorneys, we would rightfully be disbarred immediately. But those in power doing something like this, they're celebrated, they're praised, and they're given even more power. So I think with that, kind of a soapbox, the question that I want to formulate, Ryan, is how do you maintain a sense of optimism that up against such powerful odds, against such powerful people and institutions, um, you as the individual or we as individuals can make any kind of meaningful change and progress?
It's really the power of storytelling and narratives because the amount of people who have responded to me and told me, hey, I feel this. I feel that Big Law has been really, really complicit and it's hard to work in and it's hard to see happening and they don't know what to do. And there are also a lot of people who have reached out from other industries and said, this was a problem for me 2 years ago. This was a problem for me last year. This is a problem that everybody is facing to some extent. If your employer fundamentally has a lot of power, particularly in the legal profession, then they have a lot of reach to change things. And they also have a lot of speech to not, or sorry, a lot of room to not change things. And depending on the choices of your employer, your speech itself can be directly under threat. So the more people that are talking about this and sharing their stories and really coming forth about, hey, this is a real problem, let's talk about it, it gives me a lot of hope.
And it's that collective action that's going to bring about meaningful change. That's how it's always been. Whether it's the Montgomery bus boycott, whether it's Robert Smalls convincing Lincoln to allow Black people to enlist in the Union Army to fight back against the white supremacist South during the Civil War. Whether it's Irene Morgan and Claudette Colvin as the precursors to Rosa Parks. It is those individual acts of courage that rise up. And I think I neglected to mention this earlier, but the piece that kind of was the straw that broke the law firm's back was about surveillance, was about federal surveillance. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think listeners need to know that you aren't just sharing an opinion that was by any means controversial. I think you were sharing an opinion that whether you're Republican or Democrat, liberal, conservative, far right, far left, you will agree we don't want more government surveillance over our private lives. To talk a little bit about the piece that finally kind of led to the situation that you're in right now.
Right. So I'll start bigger and then go smaller. Is none of the pieces that I wrote had any political opinion infused at all. They were all meant to be very nonpartisan and give people the information they needed to make informed decisions about what was going on in their lives, particularly non-lawyers. I thought it was a good thing to do. I kept doing it. And the latest article was about Palantir and the federal government having the ability to collaborate together as they have done in the past. There is precedent with ICE and Palantir to essentially mine individuals' personal data, profile them, and store and use it unbeknownst to them in any way that they choose to. And I think that's something that every American should be concerned about. And I think
Yeah.
that's something that we do not talk enough about. And Palantir is an extremely powerful organization and something we should be clearly discussing in public and loudly.
Ryan, your courage is inspiring, it's powerful. How can folks listening to this or watching this follow you and support you and your work and your advocacy?
Thank you. I'm at Ryan Will Powers on all socials. On my Substack, I'll continue to write about the rule of law and what we can do to defend it.
Ryan Powers, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View. If you're listening on Substack or watching on YouTube, make sure you hit that subscribe button so we can keep creating this content. Our next guest, who I'm bringing on in about 30 seconds, is Moataz Salim, a student at George Washington University who was in the clinical psychology program and was effectively suspended and expelled for speaking up for Palestinian justice. And his is another story of immense courage, especially in these difficult times. Look, we often talk about what we would do if we were alive during the Holocaust or during slavery or during the genocide of indigenous peoples. We're witnessing another genocide right now. And Muataz is an example of someone who is unapologetic in speaking up. We're speaking now with Moataz Salim. He's a Palestinian writer, activist, a doctoral student from Gaza, advocating for an end to the genocide perpetuated by Netanyahu and the Israeli government. And he's been a long-time advocate for Palestinian liberation. He came across my my field of view from one of my social media followers. I haven't shared this with him, but one of my social media followers reached out, and then a few more did and said, "Hey, this is a person that you need to pay attention to." And I saw his Instagram video where he shared a heartbreaking story about his studies and why they've been suspended, for the lack of a better word, and we can talk about that. And I felt compelled to reach out because at the end of the day, we need to elevate these stories of courage. It's easy to click a retweet or a like and share, and it's good to do that. But there are certain people, you just heard Ryan Powers talk about his story, and Moataz Salim is sharing his story as well. There are certain people who are going above and beyond, putting their own life, their safety, their financial well-being at risk for a greater cause. And until and unless we elevate these stories, I think we're doing a disservice. I'm privileged to have a platform, and I'm privileged to have Moataz Salim with us today to share his story. Thank you for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on.
As I said to my last guest, I wish we were meeting under better circumstances, but at the same time, I'm grateful to connect and to share the story. Talk a little bit about what led you to make that Instagram video, and because our listeners haven't seen it yet, our viewers haven't seen it. So if you could summarize the key points of that for them to understand the situation, I think that'd be fantastic.
Yeah. So I was doing a I was in a doctoral program. I was doing what's called a doctorate of psychology, which is kind of similar. It's like in psychology, we have PhDs and PsyDs. And so I was at the George Washington University. It's called the professional program, the professional psychology program. And I had been in it for uh, about 2 years, and essentially, I mean, I won't go into too much detail about like my very early time in the program, but actually what happened, the first thing that really encouraged me to be super outspoken even before the genocide began was that my supervisor in the program was targeted by um, these students who identify as Zionists and are very supportive of Israel. And I saw sort of this huge kind of media smear campaign, very like coordinated and whatnot. And my supervisor had for many, many years been very outspoken about it. I personally, at that time, I mean, I've always had kind of this political outlook, but I think a lot of people of my background can share, can understand this sentiment. We're told by our parents to kind of keep it on the low, like because of a very realistic, and I mean, what ended up happening to me is proof of this, that you will get targeted, you'll get marked, and kind of
Yeah.
it'll be an effort to sort of try to repress and silence your voice.
So, what's the situation now? It sounds like from your Instagram video, you've been essentially removed from the program and have been given a pretty ridiculous list of things you need to do
Yeah.
to get consideration for readmission. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So essentially, we just to kind of summarize what was kind of the final straw, so to speak, we had a guest speaker come in who had not in the talk, but later I would find that online they identified as a Zionist, a radical Zionist, in fact. And it was clear to me in the talk because it's I still find it just so insane that they came to give a talk on decolonialism.
Wow.
And it was almost like rubbing salt in the wound, you know, like, and this is over 600 days of genocide later, and they're here to give a talk on decolonialism. And almost like an hour and a half into the talk, I still hadn't heard anything about genocide, about, you know, the what I consider the most prominent decolonial effort in the world right now, for Palestinian liberation. And it was really funny. They even started with a land acknowledgement that they live on stolen land in Seattle, but neglected to mention any other stolen land.
Yeah.
And so I confronted them quite strongly. And it actually ended up being like a 15-minute back and forth where they asserted that they are indigenous to what they consider their ancestral homeland in Israel. They asserted that I, myself, as someone who has lost family members, many, like dozens of family members in Gaza, that I have no idea what Zionism is, that I am misrepresenting it, and there were many other things kind of said back and forth. But the part that I really try to talk about is that when like they in front of me said that they are indigenous to the land, and kind of in that same tone tried to negate my own
Yeah.
indigeneity to that
Yeah.
land, and the very real experiences that, and it's something you always see about like kind of the hypothetical versus material reality of what's happening to the Palestinian people. They tried to feign some sympathy, and I told them, like, if you really, really, like, you are watching those same videos and you feel bad, you would be comfortable renouncing Zionism on the spot. Um, Given that it's just, you know, a political ideology at the end of the day, a genocidal one. And they refused. So it kind of so that happens, and then
And this escalates to your removal from the program.
yes, so I had it in the back of my head that, something was going to come after me. And in fact, I warned my the dean of the program, essentially like the program director. I warned my advisor in the program, telling them that I do fear that something might be coming my way. I'm not sure, but I told them very, very upfront that, like, you need to protect me if this happens. A month later, a month after this interaction, I am literally in the middle of class, and I received the letter, which clearly outlines. It says you've been suspended. And it says that if I am on any GW property, I will be arrested on site.
Hmm.
So cue me just scrambling my things in the middle of class and like literally sprinting, running away from class because I don't want to be arrested.
Mortifying. I mean, this is mortifying, and I'm angered for a number of reasons. The least of which is not that in Florida, at a Florida University of Florida Law School, a white supremacist wrote a paper on how the Constitution does not include non-white people, specifically that it doesn't include Jewish people or Black people, and should only represent white men. And not only was he not suspended, not only was he not given a failing grade, in fact, he was given the highest grade in the class and then given the book award in recognition of his brilliant paper. And then the university defended it as free speech. And the law professor, who's also a federal judge appointed by Trump, defended it as a powerful statement of the value of free speech. This is a man advocating actively for genocide, and he's
Yeah,
celebrated and praised, whereas in your case, you're advocating against genocide and you're punished for that.
yeah.
It's outrageous and it is absolutely infuriating. Moataz, talk a little bit about your family because I know we were talking off air and you mentioned that you've lost family on both sides. Your father lived in Gaza, is from Palestine. Your mother is
Mhm.
from southern Lebanon, which is being bombed on a regular. As we're recording this, and reports just came out that the Netanyahu regime, this is journalist Mohammed Shahada reporting this, that Israel just bombed the very Gazan church that Pope Francis used to call on a daily basis during
Yeah,
his lifetime. They injured the very priest, Gabriel Romanelli, who used to update the Pope on the situation. Two churchgoers were killed, six wounded. And so, for anyone who thinks this is a Muslim versus Jewish thing, you're completely not only
ab-
misinformed, but you're maliciously misinformed.
yeah,
These are Palestinian Christians being murdered by the Israeli government right now. This is not a Muslim versus Christian thing. This is not a so-called Judeo-Christian war against Muslims or Islam. This is an autocratic fascist regime committing genocide, rather committing a Holocaust on innocent civilians. And we need to call it out for what it is. So I'm sorry, I got on a rant there, but I really want to hear about your family. I know you've lost loved ones, so I want to be sensitive not to ask you to go too personal, but whatever you're comfortable sharing with our audience, I think people need to hear the ground reality of what's happening.
yeah. I would say your analysis is correct in the sense that it's definitely not a religious war. I in on my dad's side, so I have like all my extended family on my father's side are pretty much were in Gaza. And I've lost many of them. Yeah, on like the number is over 100. I'll be candid about that, and it's I'll say it like I didn't know all of them, but I knew a lot of them, and I was very close to some of them, like my cousin Iman, Jenna, Jinan, and I will say this. I mean, I don't, my family as of now no longer like they don't, there's no trace of them in Gaza anymore because they have either been killed by Israel or a lot of us who are not there have raised funds for them to, the ones that were remaining to escape. And so there's, as far as my family goes in Gaza, Israel got what it wanted. It's ethnic cleansing, or they killed them. And even on my mom's side, I've lost several cousins of mine. One who I was very, very, very dear to me, and it was kind of, the same thing of they were just like, none of these people picked up a gun. None of them, they were just people living on their land that they have lived on, their families have lived on for generations, and they were targeted for whatever reason. And that Israel doesn't really have any need for a reason. They just kind of target the communities that are resisting. And for a lot of these people, they consist of sort of the popular base for the movements that are resisting Israeli hegemony. And it's very asymmetrical in the sense that it's just people doing whatever they can to stay on their land and to fight off this Western-backed aggression that has reached sort of a climax point.
I often point out to folks that if you honestly believe that this began on 10/7, then you haven't been paying attention at all.
No way.
Uh,
I I try to remind people of this all the time, especially when it comes to, I think a lot of people now have really, really realized that international law isn't there to really, it's there to protect Western interests first and foremost.
Right.
But it really, if you really want to go back to when it actually died, as it pertains to this case, it died in 1947 when the UN decided to partition Palestine against the will of its people.
I guess the will of the world. If you
Yes,
get
yeah.
a chance to listen to the speech given by Sir Muhammad Zafrullah Khan, who was a Pakistani lawyer and scholar, one of my heroes growing up. The lecture he was president of the UN General Assembly at the time. And if you
Yeah.
listen to his remarks, he makes explicitly clear that you are punishing the Palestinians for the crimes of Europe. You are putting Palestine on the cross and crucifying Palestine for the crimes of Europe. He acknowledges the horrors that the Jewish people suffered through in the Holocaust under Hitler's regime. He acknowledges the genocide that they suffered through and the atrocities that they suffered through. And he points out that punishing Palestine is not the answer. He goes, if it really was about a safe homeland for the Jewish people, you can establish one in the United States. They have plenty of land to give. You
Mhm.
can establish one in much of the world. But why are
Yeah.
you punishing this particular community?
Yeah.
Not to mention, and he adds to the fact that even during the Holocaust, it was the Palestinian people who willingly took in Jewish refugees because throughout history, since the advent of Islam, it was only under Muslim rule that Jewish people were safe in Palestine. Under
Mhm.
Christian rule, they were crucified, exiled, tortured, and forced to convert. And throughout the centuries since, it was only under Muslim rule. And so, the history of this has been so thwarted and misdirected as a means to justify this genocide right
Yeah.
now.
And
Um,
and I would just add to your point. I mean, I do agree with the framing that, like, we've been made to pay for the crimes of Europe, but Zionism as a political ideology, as a political movement, existed way before the Holocaust.
it did.
And it kind of reached, it really was able to gain power when in the advent of the Holocaust, and all of a sudden they had this um rationale for, you know, taking Palestine and making it into Israel. And, I never picked I don't pick who my oppressors are or who killed my family members. And, that's to say, like, to all the smears of, like, it's like Jew hate or anti-Semitism. I mean, it's gotten to a point where it's beyond absurd. It's like
Yeah.
I don't pick who my oppressor is, or
I will say this, and let me know if you experienced the same or differently. I will say this. In my circle, some of the most vociferous advocates for Palestinian liberation and justice are my Jewish friends, are Jewish scholars, are Jewish
yeah.
rabbis who recognize that what is being done is not in the name of Judaism, it's not in the name of
Mhm.
Jewish people. It is in the name of a political ideology that we need to separate from the religion of Judaism. And I'm
Mhm.
proud of the fact that I have so many Jewish amazing people in my life who are unapologetic and unequivocal about this. And there's some very prominent Jewish voices. Mandy
Mhm.
Patinkin just came out with a powerful statement to all Jewish people that,
Yeah,
anyone who's still silent on this, you're betraying your Jewish values.
yeah.
We need to be honest about that. I mean, that's been my experience. What's your experience been in that space?
That's also been my experience. I mean, for the most part, and I think like I'm glad you mentioned the Mandy Patinkin
Yeah,
quote because I think I don't think it's my place to tell the Jewish community that they have a huge problem in terms of this ideology that's taken a hold and taken a grip in most of their institutions and the like. And so I'm glad that he made that.
yeah,
I mean, I am already kind of at capacity with trying to deal with what's happening in my own life, witnessing 650 days of genocide at this point, and trying to, help out my family there as much as possible. But I do think that I do think it's important to make mention of this, which is that yes, there are a lot of people, like a lot of people and who are Jew like I have a lot of Jewish friends who are very anti-Zionist and principled in their anti-Zionism. I think it's just scary for me that like a lot of these larger institutions in the country, in the US especially, have been so thoroughly captured by Zionism. And frankly, I don't know what the answer is to kind of fight that. I don't think it's the responsibility should fall on me. And I just say that to say, like, I was really happy to see that because you have this prominent Jewish figure talking to their community, telling them, like, what the hell is going on? Like,
yeah.
this is being done in our name. And I think that's important to point out. And we like in even in my own advocacy for Palestine, for getting people to understand anti-Zionism, we always make that distinction between Zionism and Judaism, and yet the state itself puts in every effort, like when they destroy towns and cities in Gaza, you'll see pictures of bulldozers putting the Star of David. We've seen prisoners kind of have the Star of David carved into their skin.
That's
I'm
right.
just horrific
Mass
stuff.
stomach grip. I often point out, like, the very simple distinction is one is a 4,000-year-old religion and the other is a
Mhm.
150-year-old political ideology. You can't
Mhm.
compare the two. It's two very different
Yes.
things. And to conflate them is to do an injustice to the beauty of the Jewish people and the beauty of the religion of Judaism. Moataz, we're out of time, but I wanted to keep an open invitation to come back at any time and keep sharing these stories. We need to elevate these stories. And I'll ask you before you go, how can listeners and viewers follow you and support your work and support your advocacy?
Sure. So my Instagram is at Taz SDC, TAZSDC. You can follow me there. And I kind of just write here and there. I'm right now trying to figure out what's next in my career, in my life. And so if anyone listening, you have kind of some connection, whatever, whether it be in psychology or just anything to do with this like you said, modern day Holocaust. I would really appreciate that. So and
Beautifully
don't
said.
keep donating to Gaza. That is very important.
Yes. Yes, there's amazing organizations that we should continue to work with
Yeah.
to ensure we're elevating the people of Gaza. Moataz Salim, thank you for being with us today. We hope to have you back soon.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. And if you are listening on Substack, make sure you hit that subscribe button so we can keep this stuff going. Two powerful interviews from Ryan Powers and Moataz Salim, two amazing young people who aren't just talking the talk, they're walking the walk. And I mean, to put your entire livelihood on hold for your principles is a level of courage that very few people rise to the occasion to. And I commend these folks. I will be supporting them, and I hope you guys do as well. As we wrap up in these final kind of 5 minutes, I want to talk about something a bit more positive and encouraging, and that is a Superman movie. So, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen the movie yet, you can turn this off now and you won't miss anything. That's not spoilers, but I just need to talk about how phenomenal this movie actually was. It just blew my mind. Take a moment. I'm going to just talk about broader themes. I'm not going to get into the specific plots, but broader themes of this movie. You know, there's a 1950s cartoon of Superman where he's talking to a group of diverse people, young people, old people, black, white, what looks like a Latino child that he's, putting his hand on his face, caressing his face. And he says, and remember, boys and girls, your school, like our country, is made up of Americans of many different races, religions, and national origins. So if you hear anybody talk against a schoolmate or anyone else because of his race, religion, or national origin, don't wait. Tell them that kind of talk is un-American. And then the bottom line says, help keep your school all American. And they define all American as inclusivity, as racial justice, religious justice, and national justice. And this is a 1950s era comic. And so like in Jim Crow America, and the reason why this is so important, why I want to talk about this real quickly, is because the whole outrage from the right is, oh, they made Superman woke. He's woke now and he's terrible. And I'm like, you people have no idea who Superman actually was. He was always woke. Being woke is a good thing, first of all, but he was always woke in terms of respecting human dignity and diversity. It's who Superman has always been. This was Superman in Jim Crow America, an immigrant, alien, orphan, raised by a childless couple, taught to accept all religions, all races, all nationalities. He was above nationalism. He was above xenophobia. He was above racism. He was a de facto anti-establishment, anti-corruption, anti-nationalist superhero established by Jews who survived the Holocaust. So those offended by that notion of inclusivity either never understood who Superman was or why he was created, or they want to transform him into this right-wing religious zealot to appease their own egos. Either way, with this bizarre alleged criticism of woke, these folks reveal much about themselves and none about Superman. And I promise I won't go into too many spoilers. In fact, I'm not going to go into any, but I will just say this, that this is an extraordinarily timely commentary on Earth 2025. And and I feel compelled that you can read my full review on my Substack, which has gone viral, by the way, because the parallels with politics and human rights today, they just can't be ignored. And the reason why it's so significant is because movies have often served as water carriers to glorify war and nationalism. American Sniper glorified war and nationalism. Top Gun 1 and Top Gun 2. If you saw Top Gun 2, you saw them, bombing Iran and normalizing bombing Iran. And what did Trump just do? There's long been a history of the Pentagon. They actually have an office that works with Hollywood on how to frame war and how to use American military bases for their movies. Air Force One is another example of glorifying war. The president literally, being the last man standing on Air Force One and stopping terrorists. So Superman does the opposite. He appeals to our innate humanity to care for one another, to place public good above personal greed, to recognize the needs of others, to recognize the need of having heroes and having heroes who speak up and step up for marginalized communities. And that's what I think Ryan Powers and Moataz Salim did. And that's why they're in these difficult situations because they spoke up and are speaking up for marginalized communities. So with that framing, I encourage you to go and watch the film. No, they are not paying me for this. No, I'm not getting any royalties for this. Although they should be with how much I've been promoting their film. But I really appreciate it. It's the one thing I'll say about Superman is my only regret is that I can't watch it again for the first time because I really did enjoy it that much. All right, my friends, that's all we have for our show today. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. Follow me on social media at Qasim Rashid across all platforms. You have my commitment to continue to advance a show that builds on compassion, justice, and accountability for those in power. So, always got a great show lined up for next week. Be sure to tune in, same time, same place, to listen on Sirius at 10 a.m. Eastern on Sundays, or check out the podcast on my Substack, or watch the video live on my YouTube. My friends, continue to lead with compassion and justice and continue speaking truth to power. Till next week, peace.